Well, an interesting seminar that should be next Wednesday, and I was going to recite the web address to register, but Tanya's already done that ably just a few moments ago, so I won't go there, but certainly make sure you come and join us on Wednesday evening, because there should be some really valuable information there for you. Now, joining me live in the studio, my guest is Gary Topp. He is CEO of the Society of Auctioneers and Appraisers. Gary, welcome.
Thank you.
You're an old hat at this anyway, aren't you?
Old at auctions?
Well, doing TOOP TV with Anthony and so forth as well.
I've been in here before, Tim, yes.
Good. Well, let's talk auction campaigns. I guess from my point of view as an auctioneer and a very big supporter of the process, I'd like to hear from you, what are the major benefits in taking a property to auction? Why should we do it?
Well, I guess firstly, from a vendor's point of view, you deal with the cash buyers first. Quite often at the moment, it's taking 3 to 4 months to sell a property by private treaty. Mm-hmm. You can sign a property up on a 3-week auction campaign. There's a 40 to 50% chance of getting a cash unconditional contract at the end of that 3 weeks at the auction. And some of our statistics show that if the property doesn't actually sell under the hammer at auction, it's sold within, I think 80% of those properties are sold within 2 weeks of the auction, because the auction gets everyone to act. If there's an auction at 11 o'clock on a particular day, everyone who's interested comes down, whereas private treaty, a lot of people, we're just looking, we'll let you know, and then you're chasing them. But if you do an auction, the buyers chase you.
Mm-hmm. Well, if I'm playing devil's advocate and I'm a vendor who's sitting thinking, you're telling me I should auction, I feel very nervous about it, I'm concerned that on the day nothing will happen. What's the answer to that worry for a vendor?
Well, why would they be concerned nothing would happen? Because if it's for private treaty, it's going week after week, month after month, with people saying, we'll let you know, but they don't get back to you. Nothing's happening that way. One of the beauties of auction too, it's in the public forum. If you hold an auction and no one turns up, well, I guess you've got to sit down with the vendor and think, well, why is nobody here? Mm. And from a buyer's point of view too, quite often when a buyer's trying to buy a property, someone else has made an offer, we'd like you to increase your offer, they're sort of running an auction behind the scenes. So from a buyer's point of view too, if there's someone else bidding, they at least know what they're up against. And I think one of the biggest complaints we get in our office, I've never ever had a complaint about auction, but it's people saying, I put in my best offer and then found out I missed out by $1,000. The agent rang me and said they sold it to someone else. Whereas in an auction, you can see who's bidding, and if someone else is bidding and then you want to go an extra 1,000 or a couple of thousand or 10,000, you've got the opportunity to do it rather than just be told, sorry, you missed out.
It's all over, yeah. Well, there's a lot of transparency, no question about that. What about the instance where the auctioneer is standing in front of a number of people who are keen to buy the property, they've registered, and no one wants to bid? What's the benefit in being first up and getting involved?
I had a recent example last Saturday morning. One of our auctioneers did an auction. There were 7 registered bidders. No one actually bid. But at the end of the day, that auctioneer and agent had the details of 7 people that were keen enough to come down and give their name, address and so forth. So I would assume they possibly couldn't buy under the hammer, but if the agent or the auctioneer hasn't sold that property a week after, I'd be very, very, very surprised, because at least he ended up with a database of people that were keen enough to come down and sign on the dotted line to say that yes, they're formally interested in negotiating to buy the property.
It's actually a good point you make there, because often people will assume if I'm not in a position to bid at the auction, then I don't need to register. Whereas if, taking on board your comments there, if you're interested in the property, even if you can't bid, it's not a silly idea to register, because then you've got a trail that the agent can follow and say, well, okay, we're past the auction, what would you like to do?
I think the beauty of an auction too, it puts the time limit on negotiations. I personally had a house for sale at Galway years ago. It was for sale for 2 years. We signed it up for auction, and would you believe, sold it to the man who lived next door. The local butcher was the neighbour. He drove past a for sale sign and did nothing for 2 years, saw the auction, fronted up, very committed vendor by that stage, might I add. But
2
the
years.
auction got the person to act. It puts a time limit on negotiations. Another advantage of auction too is if you go for broke, you put some slightly larger ads in over a shorter period of time, and you're lucky enough to get it sold, you save having to advertise it week after week, week after week. You get the property sold in a far shorter price range. Our figures at the moment show that whilst not every property sells by auction, that if they're sold within a couple of weeks of the auction, if they haven't gone under the hammer, it's putting the total days on the market at something like 40, when it can take 3 to 4 months at the moment to sell a property in the metropolitan area.
And they're compelling figures because private treaty sales, if they do drag on, don't take into account the emotional stress either that people perhaps suffer going week after week after week, not knowing when their property's going to sell and not being able to make plans.
And from the vendor's point of view too, if they can get it over in 3 weeks rather than 3 months, that's 3 or 4 open inspections, not 30 open inspections. So they're not having to get the house ready, go out, spend more on advertising and so forth. So I can't see for the life of me why in the first instance everyone doesn't give auction a burst, try and sell the property to a cash buyer. If that doesn't work, well then have your normal private treaty sale you talked about in the first place.
Nothing lost afterwards. Gary, stick with us. We'll perhaps touch on the changes to legislation shortly. Now we're going to go and have a look at our Going, Going, Gone segment.